Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the SHAG Week Podcast, hosted by me, Poppy Coates, your Women's Student Community Officer for this academic year. Today's episode that we're filming for the second time is titled Between the Sheets of Knowledge, and we'll focus on all things kind of sex education related. So I'm joined today by the lovely Madeline Gray, VP Education. Would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, of course. So, well, Poppy, as you said, I am VP Education this year, which means that I deal with representing academic interests, and I sit in a lot of university meetings. Love it though. It's very important to have student voice raised in those meetings. So yeah, that's me.
That's you. Perfect. So let's begin by kind of discussing a bit about what sex education is and why is it important specifically for kind of university students.
Yeah, so I've always been a big advocate for the sort of stepped approach. So making sure that content is age appropriate, not because there's something hideously explicit about the concept of sex education, but I think more aptly, it's the idea of making sure that the information is able to be understood by its target audience. So pitching it in a way that relates to their understanding of the stage of life that they're in. And I think generally in the UK, we're not too bad at the sort of birds and the bees towards the end of primary school and then going into more, contraception, STIs, that sort of thing into secondary school. But I think the buck kind of stops at university. There's no framework for it, whereas there is a framework in the earlier years. And I really think we need to look at how the changing, because coming to university, whether you're commuting or leaving home for the first time, it's a big change of environment, a big change of dynamic. And there's no framework for how we understand the changing nature of them relationships and sex within the university context. So it is incredibly important to have sex at uni. Shame that it's not mandated, really, isn't it?
No, it is. I agree. And I just have a Planned Parenthood definition of sex education here, and a lot of the points that you've mentioned and kind of navigating relationships, kind of especially in this new environment that students come into when they go to university, and this framework that you've mentioned in the earlier years. So the government in 2019 made it kind of compulsory that primary and secondary education must provide some form of RSE, which is relationship and sexuality education. Within the primary school framework, this was more like family dynamics, including LGBTQ plus family dynamics. And within secondary school, this was more gender, sexual orientation, and kind of sexual relationship oriented. And I know you've spoken a bit about kind of what the benefits would be if this would continue. Is there anything else you want to add to that about if that framework was, if it did exist, how would that be beneficial in a university environment?
Yeah, so I think that I mentioned that university is a big change of dynamic. It's a big change of environment. It's also an environment that does lend itself towards a more liberal lifestyle in terms of it might be for lots of people drink when they're a teenager at home, but lots of people don't. Lots of people experience drinking as recreation at university for the first time, and that completely changes the dynamics of sex and sexual relationships and relationships as a whole. And I think there needs to be some framework around the consent, especially with alcohol, but also consent in general. Navigating relationships when you may be living together for the first time, because lots of students, end up in relationships with people that they live in halls with, or they end up in a relationship with someone that they're in their house with in later years, or they move in with their partner in their final year. And I think we need some sort of framework for that isn't just based on what you can seek out yourself, because it is easy to seek out information, but there's a lot of misinformation.
Yes. Kind of speaking to that a bit, about a lot of people's first experience with kind of sexual information and even sexual content is potentially via social media platforms that may potentially or is kind of misleading content that is then not fact checked and is just, taken as a truth. So I think if a system was in place in kind of university, it would help kind of dispel this rife misinformation around sex and sexual relationships. Talking about dispelling misinformation, who and kind of what resources specifically at Royal Holloway are there where people can go to get more sex education and to dispel these myths that are prevalent?
Well, funnily enough, you're actually in exactly the right place. So we are filming this in the recording this.
Yeah.
We are speaking together today in the Advice Centre in the Students' Union building. Now, our advisors are really great at signposting to the various services that can provide you with more tailored support. But also, if you don't want to actually speak to someone, we have a lot of resources which you can come and take. So leaflets, contraception, STI testing kits, pregnancy tests. These are all things that you can just come along and take with you when you leave. You don't need to talk to people about it. But if you would like to talk to people about it, you can talk to our advisors and also the Wellbeing Royal Holloway service. So it normally goes into like a general inbox, but then they will signpost you to the right services and the right tailored support. And I think, especially considering as a society, young people are more liberal, but there is still a taboo around talking about sex. And we would talk about this earlier about I think young people are quite good about being open with it when it's going well, but less so when it's not. It can feel shameful, to admit that you don't know something or something's going wrong. And I think that's when it can be really helpful to get this sort of independent, completely confidential advice.
Yes. And obviously, as you've said, alongside providing advice and resources, it's a very good way to get signposted to the appropriate resources, which is always crucial as well. Do you have any closing statements or remarks?
Closing statements. The thing is, this joke will not be funny the second time around. However, I will use it. Bridget Phillipson, Education Secretary, if you are listening to us, please extend our sexual education framework into the university years.
Perfect. Well, thank you for joining me once again for this conversation. A little bit of deja vu. But yeah, thank you so much for this conversation.